Embarrassing. What a pitiful performance tonight out of the Iowa basketball team in Hilton Coliseum. We break it down and some Iowa football, a potential look at the offensive coordinator position today. Locked on Hawkeye.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. As always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you get podcasts, 5-star review, or if you're on the YouTube side of things watching us, make sure you hit that subscribe button. All of it helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy with Prize Picks. That was hideous tonight. Woof to the nth degree from this Iowa men's basketball team as they are run out of the gym for the second straight game. It happened on Monday night against Purdue. And, we chalk that one up to terrible timing, bad spot. Purdue coming off a loss against Northwestern on Friday night. They're back home in their home building, get a little home cooking. Zach Edey with this front line, he's going to eat them alive. And it played out in the fashion that many people anticipated. But, the saving grace and something that at least you could have been hopeful for is Iowa has been pretty good at bouncing back. They've done a good job in the past of finding a way to get back on the right side of things. And if there are performances like this in the Fran McCaffery era, this team at least competes. There was no competing out of this group. That is the thing that makes this game embarrassing. It's not losing. It's not getting beat. In fact, it's not even getting blown out. There's going to be games where a team just shoots lights out. A team's just everything that they're throwing up there is going in, and you're going to have those kind of nights. But to not compete, to get run out, to get punked in that fashion, that's where the embarrassment lies for this Iowa basketball team. And looking forward, it's hugely concerning. Breaking things down, and we start at the start of the game. For the first time this season, a change in the starting lineup. It was not the change that many people hoped to see with Owen Freeman inserted into the starting lineup. It was a change at the point guard position. And instead of going with Desonte Bowen, who had been okay to this point in the season, certainly had taken a step forward from what we saw a year ago during his true freshman campaign. I didn't think did anything wrong, but he just wasn't getting the minutes. So I said it earlier in the week. If Desonte Bowen is not your point guard, then do that. So it was Josh Dix that went in the lineup, and Josh Dix was not ready. A couple of turnovers early in the game. Here's the problem. You play Josh Dix as your point guard. He's not a point guard. He just isn't. He's not a facilitator, not a playmaker at the kind of level to be a starting point guard in the Big Ten. Tony Perkins has done it. He's done it in a pinch. In fact, he ran a lot of point and Iowa's high water mark here over the last half decade in that run in the Big Ten tournament a couple of years ago with Keegan Murray and company. It was him and Bohannon sharing the duties in the backcourt, and a lot of times it was Tony Perkins running the point, but he's not a full-time point guard. So you're starting off the game with two guys that aren't point guards running the point guard position. Peyton Sanford was the only guy that seemed to show up in the first half of that game. They tried to go with Owen Freeman, didn't work early on. It was just a comedy of errors. And this kind of game, when you're getting beat in a variety of different ways, it wasn't one thing that you can point to. It's not one point of the game that you're struggling with. But we know with Iowa, what they are built on in the Fran McCaffery era is the offense. And this offense right now, for at least Fran McCaffery standards, it stinks. It's bad. They are completely out of sync. They do not look like they have really any kind of clue of what they're trying to do on that end of the floor. A motion offense that is broken. Guys late in the shot clock just having to chuck things up because they have to be built a whole lot differently. And they don't have the same kind of level of skill in the offensive side of things that they've had in the past. I think a part of that is not having a dedicated point guard, the continued screwing around with that position that is so important to Iowa basketball, and not knowing what they're going to be doing. And if you're Brock Harding, you're going to go out there, get a couple of minutes, you get pulled. Josh Dix gets the start, gets pulled very quickly in the game. Desonte Bowen started for majority of the season, yet he's down there, 6th or 7th in minutes played on this team this year. it's very difficult to have any kind of continuity on the offensive end and be able to do anything when you're doing these different things and trying to figure out the right combinations. It's there's a lot to be upset about with this team. And we get off early in the year. All right. Played well against Creighton. And I think that certainly gave me hope that this team had a chance to be better than I thought they were going to be coming into the season. I told you throughout the summer and the early fall, I thought this team was going to be short of even a bubble team. Maybe get over 500. Could it be good enough to sneak into the NIT, something like that, maybe. But I didn't think they were going to be a team. And then you saw the way that they competed against Creighton and got down in that game and battled back and gave themselves an opportunity. And maybe a call as they wanted to cut it to 7 at one point in the second half. Looked like Sanford was fouled in the corner. He said, all right. Hey, they battled back. They showed something. And then this last week, it has completely gone off the rails. You have the 2 blowout losses now to Purdue and Iowa State. 2 difficult road venues, no doubt, but 2 games where you just were not on the same level, not even close. You couple that with the embarrassing performance that they had against Oklahoma. That was just awful, awful basketball. Awful basketball this week, awful basketball against Oklahoma. And the one silver lining that we're trying to find right now is still getting beat by double digits by Creighton. And a night where Creighton could have easily run them the other way and run them out of the gym. That's where we are right now. Number one, have to figure out the point guard spot. It's just too important for Iowa. I was not going to get stops defensively. For whatever reason, Fran McCaffery, it is not a big part of what his program is. He's had opportunities as guys have moved on, coaches have changed. He could have done what John Beilein did at Michigan, turn them into a nice, solid program that make the tournament more times than not, like Iowa basketball, but couldn't get over the hump, couldn't push through, couldn't even get to a second weekend. He brings in a dedicated defensive coach, and all of a sudden, they're in the national championship game. No, I'm not saying that a defensive coordinator, if you will, was going to do that for Iowa basketball, but maybe somebody that has some kind of semblance of what you're doing on that end of the floor, because Iowa sees a high screen and roll, and they're screwed. They don't have a clue. Do we hedge? Do we lay back? Do we drop coverage? They don't know. And it's year after year after year of the same kind of garbage. We know they're going to suck defensively. Guess what? They suck again this year on the defensive end of the floor, coupled with an offense that isn't good. That's not going to work. Is it fixable? Is there hope? We'll talk about that as we continue here and break things down a little bit deeper. Plus, we got Iowa football talk coming your way as we will take a look at the offensive coordinator position and a little bit of news items starting to come out of that as we take a look forward to what is the future of Iowa football. More on the hoops in an embarrassing effort against Iowa State and a turnaround now as they have another Big Ten game coming up this weekend at home against Michigan. What's the crowd going to look like? What's the team going to look like? We'll talk about that as we continue. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of having to worry about thousands of other players in there, you got pros, you got sharks, you got people with deep analytical knowledge. You just pick more or less of a stat player projection between 2 and 6 players and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks, so much fun. We talked about yesterday what you could do for Iowa basketball as they took on Iowa State. You can do hoops. You can do football. You can also put them together. That's right. They have now their specials league, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce, a 2.5 combo of 3-pointers made for LeBron and receptions for Travis Kelce. That's what you can do with Prize Picks. Testing my scales on Prize Picks this season. Been great and a great way to play daily fantasy sports, something that I've done for a number of years, and I love the platform that they have with Prize Picks. Simple to play. You can make picks and get in and out in less than 60 seconds. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege right now and make sure you use code LockedOnCollege. That will get you a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege with the code LockedOnCollege for that first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Trent Condon back with you once again here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Frustration, no doubt. That is what Iowa basketball does. And if you're new to the program, every day, as you guys know, Iowa basketball is my first love, my first sporting love. It is the sport that I grew up with back in the 80s that was completely different. I mean, you look over my shoulder, if you're watching us on YouTube, you see my poster up there, BJ Armstrong, Roy Marble, Ed Horton. Those are my dudes. And Iowa basketball, for whatever reason, even more than football, makes my blood boil. And performances like that are frustrating to no end. Not competing, not giving effort. You just can't do that. You don't have a go-to guy. We mentioned the point guard situation, what they're trying to figure out there, and an offense that's out of sync. You got big time issues here. So as you look a little bit deeper here, and a couple of numbers that jumped out to me from this game. First of all, who showed up, right? Owen Freeman didn't play well in the first half, came back in the second half. Late in the game, you saw Desonte Bowen. Good for him, at least, at not dropping his head after losing his starting gig. He was back out there and at least competing at a level. You know, Brock Harding's going to bring it. Just not a great shooter of the basketball at this point in time, and dealing with the athleticism of that Iowa State backcourt. Guys like Taman Lipsey, they got some dudes back there in the backcourt. Very difficult for Brock Harding at this point at 152 pounds to turn the corner against the physicality that he's dealing with. Sanford Payton shot it well in the first half, was able to at least keep Iowa relatively close in the first half, but things just continued to pile up and got uglier and uglier as the game went on. Iowa, we talked about the offense. Normally, a very good offensive team. They average 0.903 points per possession. Iowa is normally in that 1.1 points per possession, excuse me. Easy for me to say. That's usually a number that they're with. And the turnovers, something that we're not used to with Iowa basketball. They turned it over a whole bunch in this basketball game, and it was really all over the place. I mean, turnovers, you had 2 from Josh Dix. He had 3 from Tony Perkins, 2 from Sanford, 1 apiece from both Cricky and Bronze when he came into the game, 3 from Brock Harding, 4 turnovers from Owen Freeman, a couple from Price Sanford. It was everybody. And a game overall where Iowa turns the basketball over 19 times. I think you can count on one hand the number of times, certainly since Fran got the program back up on equal footing after his first couple of seasons, that they've turned it over that many times. And though Iowa State's a very good defensive team, that's what they've been built on under TJ Otzelberger, nothing like this. This was bad. That one definitely jumped off the page. Iowa shared the ball all right with 14 assists on 22 made field goals, but 22 made field goals. Yeah, not going to do it. 65 points in the game. Just some brutal, brutal numbers there. At one point in the basketball game, Iowa was getting beat 30-2 in points in the paint. And we're not talking about guys like Zach Edey. And we're not talking about some great centers and power forwards here for Iowa State. Robert Jones offensively was a joke his first year at Iowa State. Although he's made improvements and put the work in and is playing much better this season, that's not a guy that should be dominating the paint in the fashion that he was. Trey King, I wouldn't have an answer for him. And it's something that I've talked about a lot. And though we did see it a little bit here throughout the course of this game, it hasn't happened enough this season. Look, Iowa has to go back to the drawing board and figure this out. And if I was going to hit the apex, and if they're going to give themselves an opportunity to get back in it and maybe potentially be a tournament team, which I think is a long ways away as we look at this team right now, and a win against Michigan and a win next week against Florida A&M is not going to change my opinion of that. However, if you're going to get there, the likely scenario is you're going to have to see a whole lot more Owen Freeman. He is certainly one of the best players on this basketball team. He needs to be out there playing 25, 28 minutes a game at minimum. It just has to. Yeah, there are going to be times that he's going to get in foul trouble. Fran needs to get over the 2-foul rule. That's a conversation for another day. Owen Freeman needs to be a part of this. Play Cricky and Freeman together. Play those two guys out there. Tony Perkins, not great tonight, but we know what TP is going to be. He runs hot or cold. That is what he is. Certainly, he has earned it and earned a place to be out there. Sanford, because of his shooting ability, absolutely needs to be out there. And then figure out point guard. If it's Bowen, if it's Harding, if it is Dix, whatever it is, figure that thing out. What does that mean? I'm sorry, but enough for Patrick McCaffery in the starting lineup. The guy right now has the 3rd most minutes on the team. It's embarrassing. It is. There is no way that he should have the 3rd most minutes on this team. He's not playing at that level. He is not deserving of what we've seen throughout the course of this season to have that many minutes. Though he can make some shots offensively, though he has the athleticism to get to the rim, If he's got a clear lane, he's going to flush it and look good on that. There's not enough else that he does to help a basketball team for him to have the third most minutes on the team. I think he needs to be out of the starting lineup. I think he needs to be coming off the bench. We've seen him off the bench play well at times. Maybe a chance to go that direction. And, it kind of goes also to the future of Iowa basketball. And not just this season, but towards the future. Patrick's eligibility is coming to a close. And this is going to be it for him. Walking out the door. What does that mean for Fran? Now, as we know with his his youngest son, what they went through this summer, the accident, him saying that he's not going to come to Iowa. What does that mean for Fran? A guy in his 60s now, guy that's had plenty of success, made plenty of money. Are we nearing the end? We talked in the past a lot about Ferentz fatigue, right? Ferentz fatigue that at this point, there are so many people after 25 years, doesn't matter how good it is, doesn't matter how many wins there are, when something bad happens, they're going to come out and they're going to talk about it. And even if things are good, at least in terms of wins are happening, they're going to talk about the negatives in the football program because they're ready for a change. And there's a whole lot of Ferentz fatigue out there, and there's a whole lot of Fran fatigue. A whole lot of the fan base that just is ready for a change, ready for something different. Not getting to the second weekend has been the big demerit on the resume of Fran McCaffery. And he's been here 14 years, and there's been successes, and there's been runs to the tournament. But once they've got there, there's been upset losses. There's been opportunities that they haven't been able to punch through. And because of that, there's so many people that are ready for a change. Now, I would argue that the likely change of what's going to come next is not going to be at the level that you hope. It's probably not going to be a step up. It's likely going to be a step back. Because to have this kind of sustained success at Iowa, it's not an easy thing to do. And the Iowa basketball program, in terms of Big Ten, and even the future of the Big Ten, with 4 new members coming in next year, with UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington, it's down the list a long ways. It's a better basketball job than Penn State, Northwestern, maybe Nebraska. Yeah, Nebraska. Obviously, in terms of success, we're talking completely different. Iowa basketball far surpasses those kind of programs. However, facility, fan base, we've seen it this year. They haven't got 10,000 people paid attendance inside of Carver so far this season. What's going to happen Sunday? And though the paid attendance, I'm going to guess, is going to be north of 10,000, how many butts are actually going to be the seats in the seats in Carver? It's not going to be a full boat. Will it be 2/3 full? Will there be 10,000 people in there? I'm not so sure. I think we're going to learn a lot. And speaking of that Fran fatigue, where the fan base is coming up on Sunday. A name opponent in Michigan. Wolverines are not very good this year, but it's a name opponent. Sunday afternoon, no excuses, no late nights, nothing like that. It's a weekend game. And if they don't have that thing, even 2/3 full, I think it's going to say a lot about this program. We got some football to talk about here on Locked On Hawkeyes. We'll do that as we continue. Iowa looking for a new offensive coordinator, and the concern was maybe the Hawkeyes were going to wait until after the bowl game. Not the case. Kirk talking to some coordinators. We'll talk about it as we continue here. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Hawkeyes also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. We got you covered on the national front, Locked On College Basketball, Locked On College Football, Locked On Big Ten with Craig. He does great work over there. And your professional team, doesn't matter if it's MLB, NBA, NFL, we got you covered as well across the Locked On Network with your team every day. Over to some football to wrap things up, and a text message earlier today. If you're part of Chad Leistikow, great reporter with the Des Moines Register and the columnist on Iowa Sports, had this to say in the text message regarding, the offensive coordinator search. Kirk Ferentz conducting some interviews today. Based on what I know, would rule out John Budmeyer and Tim Polasek as possibilities. The timetable will be up to the head coach. That again from Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register. So a couple of points there. One of the big concerns, certainly for me and many people out there, is Kirk Ferentz obviously not pleased about the way that this played out. An in-season firing of his son, and in-season firing of anybody on the staff, I think would have been certainly drawn the ire of Kirk Ferentz. But the way it played out, Iowa afterwards then winning the 4 consecutive games in November, punching their ticket to Indianapolis, that frustrated him. And the thought was, well, he's just going to hand it over to John Budmeyer, guy that has a year of coordinator experience. Didn't go well. He was fired. And that was going to be the direction that he was going to go. Good to see that's not the case. Look, John Budmeyer's had his hands inside the program for the last 2 years. And though he is not an on-field coach, he is a big part of what they were doing offensively as an analyst. And it was awful, as we know. Just bad. Tim Polasek, guy that was an offensive line coach here before he went to Wyoming and reunited with Craig Bull, who he was with for a long time at North Dakota State. Guy with a background as a quarterback coach, in fact, a college quarterback himself. Guy that's called plays. He called plays at Wyoming this year. Led them to 108th in the country in total offense. Offensive numbers that obviously look a whole lot better than Iowa, but don't exactly measure up to what you have across the board in college football. Those two guys out. What does that mean? Paul Chryst has been bandied about a whole bunch, right? Paul Chryst, former Wisconsin coach, former Wisconsin coordinator, did a great job there as a coordinator, as a head coach. Didn't work out, lost his job with the Badgers, but a guy that knows how to call plays, has done a good job, and obviously a style that would fit with Iowa. One of the reasons I warmed to the idea of Paul Chryst is he feels to be a guy that Kirk would be more hands-off. And what I look at it, and even if it would be a younger offensive coordinator, right? You bring in somebody that doesn't have the same kind of experience, but has done good things early in their career, is that Kirk's still going to have his hands in there a whole lot. And this is the way things have to be. That's not what they want. I believe Paul Chryst would be a guy that Kirk would be more hands-off of what they're trying to do offensively, much like he is with the defense and Phil Parker and letting Phil do his thing. That's why Paul Chryst, of the group of realistic candidates, excites me. And Ryan Grubb at Washington, that'd be great. Look, they're getting ready to play in the college football playoff. He's an Iowa native, but it's going to take a lot of money, and it would also take Kirk probably staying out of it, and probably some more moves also on that offensive staff. And we don't know at this point if that's something that is also going to be a scenario. Like, there's a real possibility, and the continued power that is being gained by coordinators across the country, that they're also going to want an ability to add to the staff and bring in guys that know how to run the kind of system that they're looking at. So those are a couple other names out there. Another name that is really intriguing, Matt Drinkle, who's at Army. You say, all right, come on. Matt Drinkle at Army running the triple option. That's not going to work. Well, slow down a little bit. Well, first of all, he's an Iowa guy. Went to Bettendorf. Was a wide receiver with the Hawkeyes before a career-ending injury that he had. He was part of the 2002 team. He's a guy about my age, early 40s, mid-40s. Again, the Army thing, I think, scares some people off right away, because I was not going to come in and run the triple option. I'm not going to run the flex bone. It's not going to be anything like that. However, before he went to Army, he was at Kansas Wesleyan. Won a lot of games, competed at a high level in the NAIA. But the thing that, as I was doing a little research on Matt Drinkle, was that he ran the power spread. That is the offense that I've been craving for Iowa to run for the last 6 or 7 years. It makes a whole lot of sense. Yes, you need a quarterback that can move more than Spencer Petras, even more than a Nate Stanley. Can Cade McNamara do that? I think a little bit. You're going to be looking at a different kind of guy. But when he was a head coach and he was winning 13 games a year at Kansas Wesleyan, it was the power spread. It's something that I think could work at Iowa. I think you could do some things. Again, realistic. Iowa's not going to run the air raid. They're not going to be chucking around 60 times a game. But balance. And something that evolves this offense that has been stuck in the mud for so long now, coupled with maybe a passing scheme that actually makes sense for what Iowa can do. Iowa's not going to get 4-star wide receivers. Certainly not right now. Well, they have one in Caleb Brown, and you saw his emergence during the month of November. Yeah, that was pretty good. You'd love to get more of those guys. The likelihood is not real high that that's going to happen, but that was a name that I think is at least intriguing. Put that one out there. We'll throw it into the stratosphere, see what comes out of it. As more information becomes available, we will continue to pass it along. Hey, the great news also is that this offensive coordinator, at least Kirk, is talking to people right now, because there was also a sentiment out there that, hey, they have an offensive coordinator until January 1st, until the final gun blows in the game against Tennessee. But Kirk wasn't going to look at it. Not the case. He understands the importance. He knows and realizes, obviously, what they have to do in order to compete going forward and in order to improve this offense. We'll see. We got you covered here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Coming up next week, we'll be back with you on Monday with an instant reaction podcast after that game against Michigan. Also, earlier on Sunday, the women go over to Madison to take on Wisconsin in a sold-out Kohl Center, a Kohl Center that hasn't been sold out in decades for women's basketball. It will be on Sunday. So we'll have basketball to talk about, a little wrestling going on, and of course, everything happening with football, including the transfer portal. Your team every day here on the Locked On Network. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again on Monday. Go Hawks.